WNST, of our WNST sponsors, sending us to Super Bowl 53 next week in Atlanta, Georgia, including our friends at Strategic Factor. They haven't sent me a sweatshirt here yet. I still have the T-shirt on the webcam. It's too cold to just wear one T-shirt. I need like 3-4 layers. Luke, it won't be as cold as it was in Minnesota, but at least we got that sort of a start to the week. And the one thing I already know is we're going to land in Atlanta on Sunday, and the first thing we see is going to be Tom Brady. 10 stories high on every dude, it's outrageous, but I guess we can't begin to talk about these championship games without talking about the officiating, right? I mean, here we go again, and the two most important games of the year, they didn't know their head from their bananas. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I don't think the officiating was nearly as pivotal in determining the outcome in New England, Kansas City, even though there were certainly some calls that left you scratching your head.
By the way, the Edelman fielded punt, I haven't seen anything like that since the Maxwell Smart trick shot. You know, honestly.
Oh, it's crazy, right? What came to mind for me immediately was Edelman trying to one-up Bill Buckner there. I guess he didn't touch it. I'm not sure one way or the other. I'm a little surprised the call didn't stand on the field, but let's face it, everyone's talking about the non-pass interference call at the end of regulation for the Saints. Certainly when you consider the circumstances, the stakes at that point in time, it's difficult to recall too many other missed calls that egregious in that critical of a moment.
Dude, I'm 4 decades later still talking about Renfro in the back of the end zone in Pittsburgh, right, as an Oiler fan. I don't know how. I mean, it's one thing if you're the Bills and you lose in a wide right field goal, or, you know, the heartache of Billy Cundiff here and not calling the time. You know, there are all sorts of ways to blow the game. I mean, I know Brian Billick probably had some flashbacks to Minnesota and Anderson missing a field goal. So, you know, these games bring on those kinds of stakes, whether it's John Elway in the drive in 1986. But I've never seen anything quite like this one, and I think we've talked so much about review of pass interference, and every time I bring it up, the smart people, Billick, Phil Savage, they laugh at me. Like, that would never happen. No one would ever want that for the sport, and yet we got the wrong team in the Super Bowl this week.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've talked about this with you a lot, and I go back and forth on some of these things. I mean, at the end of the day, we're not going to get a 100% perfectly called game. I mean, it's just not going to happen unless you want to sit there for 7.5 hours and have review after review after review. So at some point in time, we all do need to accept that there are going to be some mistakes, in the same way that players and coaches aren't going to play and coach perfect games. But that said, there has to be some mechanism in place to try to prevent something that egregious, something that over-the-top obvious from occurring. And look, you know that I absolutely loathe the culture of complaining about officiating all the time. I mean, honestly, there are plenty of games that are ruined on Twitter for me that all anyone does is just complain about every single call. You know, whether it's for one team or the other, it's just, you know, complain.
It wore me out in the old days with Terps fans, with Carolina refs. I mean, literally, I would go to those Terps games down at Cole Fieldhouse, and everything around me was bitching about the officials. And I was like, it turned me off of Maryland fans, to be honest. So, I mean, this is 30 years ago.
Everyone does it. I mean, everyone does it in every single sport. I mean, every fan base does it. But, and I'll also point this out, even after the non-call, the Saints still had like about a 78 to 80% win probability. So let's also remember the game didn't end on this, and the Saints still had multiple chances to close the deal, and they didn't. And they had multiple chances to close the deal up until that point, and they didn't. They didn't play a very good second half. Drew Brees did not play a good second half whatsoever. But all of that being acknowledged, when you look at this specific call, or non-call, I should say, I mean, the game would have been all but over. I mean, they would have been able to run the clock down to 10 to 15 seconds to go and kick a field goal. And it would have been hard to foresee, short of a miracle, the Rams being able to tie the game. So as much as I really hate the mindset of saying that the refs completely changed the outcome of a game because, lots of stuff happens over the course of a game, and lots of stuff happened after that call. It's hard to point to this one and say and argue that it didn't, and it's a shame, and it's certainly something that is a really bad black eye for the sport, and what should have been a really entertaining, great day of football. I mean, we had 2 overtime championship games. And the first
unprecedented,
thing we're talking about
right?
is
Literally, right? Yeah, well, and we got great players, we had great coaches, we got great storylines. We'll get to all of that, dude.
Sure.
I mean, we're going to be together next week.
We should still all talk about that because, this doesn't completely ruin the whole day, at least for me, because I'm not going to allow officiating to completely ruin it.
That's because you don't live in New Orleans.
Try telling that to a Saints fan, right? I mean, try telling that to a Saints. And I'll also throw this out there. It looked like there was a face mask on Jared Goff inside the 10-yard line that probably turns that into a touchdown. So, we can always do this, and that's why I say at the end of the day, we do have to accept that there are going to be missed calls, and there are missed calls every single week and in every single game, in every single sport. And we do have to acknowledge that, but there has to be some mechanism in place to prevent something like this that wasn't just pass interference, but it was helmet-to-helmet contact as well, to prevent something that egregious from going uncalled in that situation. We've got to figure out something, and I don't want to see more replay, but if it means we need to just expand what you can review, and maybe it's still just 2 challenges for a coach, or maybe we make everything booth review, I don't know. I mean, I don't have the perfect solution for it, but what happened on Sunday is not something that you want to see repeated again, and you certainly feel for the Saints. I mean, I think Adam Schefter put out the tweet and mentioned that, last year it was the Minneapolis Miracle that knocked them out, and then they lose with this having such a big part to do with it. You have to go back to, I think, the drive and the fumble for the Browns back in the 80s to think about a team losing in the playoffs in such heartbreaking fashion back-to-back years. I mean, it's just devastating for the Saints and understanding where Drew Brees is in his career, but, I mean, there's got to be something that can be done to remedy something this bad from going uncalled and not being able to fix it.
Well, let's go through this. Let's start with the Patriots, and I hate that we're going to be spending 8 days a week next week down in Atlanta going through the legend of Belichick and Brady, but just the game itself and winning this kind of a game on the road. All I could think about sitting in the upper deck 2 years ago in Houston when they were coming back from 28-3 and they would win that game is all I thought about is what haven't we seen them do? We haven't seen them come back from 4 touchdowns. Going on the road and winning a championship game like this at 41 years of age and, on a 10-degree night or whatever it was in Kansas City, that's something we haven't seen them do. We haven't seen them really play as massive underdogs in most of these years, right? Like, in most of these years, they're home, they're the favorite, they're supposed to win most of the years. And there's been so many of them. I mean, going back to, turn of the century for crying out loud at this point. But the way they do it, the quietness, the off-season of everything's falling apart, they don't have as good of a personnel group as they've had in the eras of the Teddy Bruschies and the Woolforks and the Seymours. Just name any of the great players that have played there. I don't look on the field and see this Patriot group and say, well, they got 6 Hall of Famers the way maybe the Ravens didn't know one. It's not like that, and yet here they are again. And I look, books have been written about this. They continue to be written about this. We'll talk all about it next week. But it's a fascinating case study in the most competitive, evenly balanced league in the world, right? Like, it is the most socialistic league in the world. They all have the same amount of money. They all have the same amount of cap space. They have the same amount of brain trust. The owners are all emboldened to do whatever they want in that way with front office. They all have a lot of money. It's not like the premiership in soccer or Major League Baseball. It's all out of whack, as we're aware of here. To have this sort of dominance where it's not supposed to be that way over a 53-man roster. In the NBA, it's always been about one player. If you got LeBron, if you got Michael, if you got Dr. J, if you got Shaq, if you got a player in the NBA, you can do something. The NFL's not supposed to work this way, man.
No, it's not, and that's what makes it extraordinary. And this will be my 8th Radio Row, and this will be the 5th time the Patriots are representing the AFC in the Super Bowl. I mean, it's just, we're not supposed to see that. I mean, this is, 9 Super Bowls for them in the last 18 years. So on average, they're in the Super Bowl every other year. I mean, it really...
For 2 decades.
I mean, and you have to start with Brady and Belichick. I mean, you do, and you can love them or hate them as much as you want, but I've said this for the last year or two, it's getting tougher and tougher to argue against either one of them being the greatest of all time at what they do. And look, it's impossible to try to compare Bill Belichick to Vince Lombardi. It's impossible to really try to compare Tom Brady to Johnny Unitas or Joe Montana. It's such a different game. But to your point, everything is set up for them to not be able to do this. For any team, it's set up for every team to fail at some point in time because of the cap, because of the draft order, because of compensatory picks. I mean, go down the list. Everything that's out there is lined up for teams to be even and teams to be mediocre. And, look at how the Ravens have operated since their last Super Bowl. I mean, just this, this fluctuation, give or take a game or two above or below 500. And that's what it's supposed to be for the entire league. And, okay, maybe there's a couple teams like the Browns historically who are just inept, but what New England has been able to do is just extraordinary. And to your point, I mean, they weren't massive underdogs here, but they were underdogs, and I think you do view them.
At 41, you're not supposed to fly across the country at a 10-degree night and beat this kid at home in Kansas City. I shudder for the Chiefs fans, right? Like the Bills at least played in a few Super Bowls. They got to lose a few. You know what I mean? The Chiefs, what a franchise. And I said to my wife, the kicker always misses this kick in Kansas City. When he came out, he nailed the kick, and it was cool, But I said the kicker always misses this kick in Kansas City through the course of my life, And I think Lynn Elliott, and I think, Joe Montana from now 30 years ago. It's crazy, right? But that's how far back we're going, right?
Yeah. I mean, but we knew how this movie was going to end. I mean,
did we really? I didn't think the Chiefs were going to lose.
Really? I never thought. I mean, look, going into the game, I thought, okay, Kansas City's playing at home. Maybe they. But when Damian Williams scored with a little over 2 minutes to go, I mean, go look at it on Twitter. I said, I know how this movie is. I mean, at that point, I totally thought New England was going to win. Now, if D Ford doesn't line up off sides, who knows what happens there? Certainly.
There's plenty to talk about in Kansas City for the next 9 months.
Sure. Right? I mean, it was there for them. I will say this. I mean, it was there for them. There's no doubt about that. I mean, and you can go over the years. I mean, look, as great as New England has been, as great as Tom Brady and Bill Belichick have been, as much as we've talked about them playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers, and we'll continue to use that analogy until someone stops them, and until this run is eventually over. They've had good fortune, but you can say that about just about any Super Bowl winner over the course of time. I mean, go back to the 2000 Ravens and the 2012 Ravens and tell me they didn't have good fortune at some point over those 2 runs. You can point to multiple.
How about Jacoby Jones?
Yeah, Jacoby Jones, and you think of Shannon Sharp against Denver, and Shannon Sharp against Oakland, and the blocked field goal returned by Anthony Mitchell.
Tony Siragusa landing on Rich Gannon.
Right, you're always going to have that, but for them to be in this position year after year after year, I mean, it really is extraordinary. And I joked on social media, I'm pretty sure Ric Flair won his last world title when he was 51, so if we're going to use that, that means only about 10 more years to go for Tom Brady, right? I mean, it's crazy. I mean, at age 41, we even saw this with Peyton Manning. Once, historically speaking, when quarterbacks get to 40, they don't just decline; they fall off a cliff.
Yeah, it's a ledge. It's not a slope.
Right. At some point in time, Peyton Manning, and look, Peyton Manning had the neck. I mean, but there are other examples you can point to where they basically wake up and they just don't have it anymore. It's there was such, for me, and I said this to you a few years back when we were talking about Denver against Carolina. there was such a charm to trying to see Peyton Manning, who didn't have it at all whatsoever anymore, trying to not mess it up for his team and make just a couple plays, just enough plays over the course of 60 minutes to help his team win, which that was a defense-minded team at that point. But, for Brady, is he what he was 5 or 6 years ago? No. I think you see him relying much more on underneath passing, and that just being the case. But, I mean, think about that final drive in overtime. They had 3rd and long 3 different times, and they converted like it was nothing. And look, I know that Kansas City defense clearly wasn't anything special this year, but to just do that over and over and over like clockwork, and it's going to Edelman, and for Gronk to do basically nothing except for make a couple of the biggest catches of the game.
By the way, did he take like 97 snaps? Someone reported that Rob Gronkowski played 97 offensive snaps on Sunday.
I don't know the exact count for him, but I mean, there's so much talk about him retiring.
Yeah, I'm looking. Judy Batista just retweeted it. Brian Costello, the Jets beat reporter, said Rob Gronkowski played all 97 offensive snaps Sunday.
Amazing.
How is that possible?
And I just pulled up the official NFL game book, 97 snaps. And how about the fact that they played 97 snaps, period?
Yeah, so right. I mean, it doesn't say much for your defense. I mean, when you're talking about the Ravens, getting the Chiefs off the field in 46 plays or 52, whatever the number is, to be going 95 plays, wow. I mean, that's the difference as to how they wore down, how D Ford lines up in the neutral zone on play 92 or whatever it was, right?
Well, it's that, and Kansas City had 7 points through 3 quarters. I mean, whenever we talk about time...
Well, they played poorly in the first half. I mean, they just did, right?
There's no doubt. I mean, Patrick Mahomes, as much as I love the kid and as much as I think he's the MVP, and he came on in the fourth quarter, certainly, that was a pretty brutal first 3 quarters.
Yeah, it was large for him early in the game, all of it, and it felt loud, it felt cold, it felt like the big bad boogeyman was getting off the bus, and here's Belichick and Brady walking onto the field. Hey, I'll hear you out when you say you never thought the Patriots were going to lose. If you're a gambler, and I know several in my space that thought you're going to give me points with Tom Brady in a championship game against a 22-year-old kid who was on the bench this time last year, okay, I mean, I'll take 3 points with that, and we'll see how we do, right?
Yeah, and let's throw out a couple other factors, and it wasn't just Patrick Mahomes by any means. That offensive line, which, you talk about the Chiefs and what they were able to do, and the fact that they lose their running back, and Damian Williams didn't miss a beat for them, stepping in after Spencer Ware went down and Kareem Hunt was cut, obviously. So they gave up 4 sacks, though, and Mahomes was under a lot of duress. And on the flip side, Tom Brady wasn't sacked once, despite throwing 46 times. So it really does speak to the game plan, how well they played up front, and you look at the time of possession, which was over 2-1, and the other big factor that and it really came to light in overtime. How obvious, but New England was 13 of 19 on third down. 68% on third down. You're going to convert two out of every 3 third downs. Yeah, you're probably going to win, and that's remarkable, and it's frustrating for Kansas City because you look at some of the mistakes that were made. Brady threw a pick in the end zone early in that game. Some of the mistakes that were made. They turned the ball over. They made mistakes. Kansas City had golden opportunities. New England committed 2 turnovers. Kansas City didn't commit any. But you could gain 290 yards and you can't stay on the field, and your defense can't get off the field. You're going to end up having a position where you're going to be in position to lose, and New England took advantage. So look, it was a heck of a football game, but I certainly understand everyone, myself included, experiencing Patriot fatigue. But that said, you have to acknowledge what has just been an extraordinary run, and it continuing. And
we're going to be acknowledging it all week next week, for crying out loud, in Atlanta, right?
I know. But how crazy is this?
Let's talk baseball. Let's talk about the Orioles or something.
I looked this up late Sunday night. Sean McVay was 16 Jared Goff was 7 when Bill Belichick and Brady took the 2001 Patriots to the Super Bowl. That's
7.
how long this thing has been going on. The head coach for the other side was saving up gas, for gas money in high school, and the opposing quarterback on the other side was in 2nd grade. I mean, it's just, it really is remarkable. And
I'm trying to think if I have anything Rams-oriented in my life. I don't have a Rams hat. I've never been a Rams fan, although I did like Fred Dreyer and Hunter, I must say. But other than that, I have to become a Rams fan next week, right? It's going to be part of the shtick, right?
Sure, and there's even some local connections there. I mean, Todd Gurley was a Baltimore kid before he moved away as a child. I mean,
how about John Fossil, my man, running special teams? Rob Havenstein, right?
Yeah, there are some local connections, so beyond just the obvious anyone but the Patriots mentality that the entire country outside of New England has. And look, that's fine. I'll be rooting for the Rams as well. I mean, I don't really care at the end of the day.
I'm going to be in Atlanta looking for a Waffle House for you and me is what I'm going to be doing.
But it's definitely, there's some local flavor that's added into this. But, I mean, again, love them or hate them, and most of us hate them. I've said for a few years now, they're Ric Flair. I mean, you can call him the dirtiest player in the game if you want, but they're the best, and it's really at this point, I don't know how much longer it's going to go on. I feel like we've talked about this being their final time, probably 2 or 3 times now, and if you tell me a year from now we're going to be talking about the Patriots in the Super Bowl again, I'm going to say, well, okay, they'll figure out a way to do it again, and I don't know. It feels like we know it's not going to go on forever, but boy, it sure feels
it's going to go on for one more week. I know that much. We're going to be down in Atlanta next week. All of our WNST coverage brought to you by our friends at Curio, the holistic wellness, spa, cannabis, education, yoga. They do it all just south of Timonium Road on York Road. Find out all that they do at CurioWellness.com. Listen to my segment this week with Brian Sanderoff. And stop in and see Brian. Stop in and see all that they have to offer there. It's a little different than some of the other places with the green cross. Check it out. Stop in. Very friendly there with the education at Curio Wellness. Also, our friends at Strategic Factory. I'm wearing the shirt underneath all of my gear here. I hope it's a little warmer on Radio Row down in Atlanta next week. Strategic Factory is your one-stop shop for marketing, printing, promotional goods of all kinds. If you need signage, printing, branded apparel, logo designs, giveaway for trade shows, stuff like this hat, stuff like this shirt, stuff like we're going to have on the set next week, you need Strategic Factory. Find them at strategicfactory.com. Also, our friends at LifeBridge Health Sports Medicine Institute. Dr. Craig Bennett is going to join me this week. I've been wearing this really cool Stan Stasiak thing on my left arm to bed, and it's kind of fixing my left arm. It's an amazing thing. The docs there are incredible. They are the new game plan for sports-related injuries backed by the surgeons and the doctors who treat the pro athletes. We're going to be talking about concussion and head-related injuries a lot next week at the Super Bowl. We do that a lot with Dr. Kevin Crutchfield. You can find that out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault, and you can find LifeBridge Health Sports Medicine Institute at Foundry Row in Owings Mills, and Cal Ripken looks good on the billboards. And it's nice to have a commercial playing on WNST where Cal Ripken is doing the commercial, because I've never had that in 27 years. So there. So go Cal. Hope to see Cal soon, somewhere maybe courtside at a Terps game or something like that. Last but never least, the Modell Lyric. They are our partners. Check out their website as well. Man, they keep adding shows. Britt Floyd doing the music of Pink Floyd. John Mellencamp's going to be there. Joe Bonamassa. They've got comedy coming with George Lopez and Jim Gaffigan. They have one of my favorite soul jam bands showing up on Valentine's Day weekend, and it's not even the Stylistics, although they're there, and Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, but I am a big fan of the Manhattans. So the Manhattans are going to be at the Modell Lyric on February 15th, and I want to give a shout out to them, and I'll probably wind up singing Shining Star to my wife, because I love that tune. Luke is available, Luke at WNST.net. He is also Baltimore Luke on Twitter. We're going to get after it with Ravens this week, and the Harbaugh situation, and the Terps playing big games and big stakes, and the Orioles getting ready for spring training. We've got you covered this week all the way around, headed to Atlanta, and all of our Super Bowl 53 coverage next week. I am Nestor. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and Snapchat and Instagram and streaming live right here on our Facebook Live, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.